After I made quite a few Baizhu related videos in the past month, we've finally reached livestream day, which means I can finally go in detail about his kit. In this video I'll be analyzing what he can do, his builds and constellations value, the teams he can work on, and how he compares to other possible alternatives. First of all, the main parts of Baizhu's kit are his healing capabilities and his supportive capabilities, while his raw damage is pretty much an afterthought. In fact, through his HP scaling skill and burst, he can heal all the characters on the team and just the active character respectively. Also, his burst will create a rather weak shield every 2.5 seconds, for a total of 6 times over a 14 seconds duration. His burst heals have roughly the same consistency, and his skills heals will heal the whole party a couple seconds after cast. His raw healing capabilities are not particularly higher than Yao Yao's, even if you count the extra HP generated by the shields, but his advantage over her is that he can easily generate all of his heals with minimal field time, while the important half of Yao Yao's healing is locked behind her being on field for a couple seconds. Basically, if you want to get Yao Yao's big heal, you have to break your rotation structure, while it's not the same for Baizhu, as he will provide high levels of healing unconditionally. His support is rather unique, as he provides a reaction damage bonus to the active character for elemental reactions that are related to Quicken or Bloom, every time somebody receives his burst heals, for 6 seconds. The buff gets higher depending on how much maximum HP Baizhu has, up to 50,000 HPs. Still, even at full amount, the buff is not particularly impressive, as it falls short in several scenarios compared to Nahida's Elemental Mastery buff, for example, as characters like Haitham and Cyno can benefit more from that one thanks to their built-in Elemental Mastery scalings. On teams that don't feature such characters, like Aggravate teams with Keqing and Fischl, Baizhu's buffs stack up better, especially because its effects linger for 6 seconds, so they technically aren't just limited to the active character, unlike Nahida's. As I said earlier, his raw damage is pretty low, since he can only reach 100,000 damage per rotation with a critical damage build, and that falls to a horrible 25,000 per rotation with a full HP build. The silver lining is that he has access to a good damage generating artifact in the Clam set, which aligns nicely with his HP build, since its damage scales up based on heals. In particular, regarding his builds, the main things to know about Baizhu when it comes to slotting him in any team are his energy requirements and his preferred build in general. In fact, by having a 80 energy cost on his most important ability, Baizhu is quite strict in terms of the energy recharge you'll have to stack on him. Luckily, he can work around that in several ways. Primarily, double or even triple Dendro teams are a real possibility for him, and in those scenarios his energy requirements fall below 140%, even if you use his elemental skill just once per rotation. In solo Dendro teams, so double Electro Quicken teams for example, he will have to use his skill twice per rotation, and have a Favonius user on his team to fall under 140% energy recharge requirements. He also has access to energy recharge refund weapons, namely his signature and the freely available prototype Amber, which considerably alleviate his requirements. Overall, despite the big energy cost, it shouldn't be hard for you to accommodate Baizhu. Regarding his weapon choices, as I said in past videos, his signature weapon is just not worth it, as the advantages it provides over something like prototype Amber are just minimal in practice, and every other 5-star weapon just doesn't benefit him, so his choices are pretty much the already mentioned prototype Amber, or the more supportive Hakushin Ring, Favonius, Sacrificial or Wandering Event Star. In particular, Amber is a pretty standard choice that should perform quite well on all teams, since it allows him to maximize his healing, supportive capabilities and have pretty nice energy consistency, but others can situationally be better depending on the team. I'll address this more carefully later when I'll talk about team builds. Much like his weapons, there is a standard choice for his artifacts, and more situational choices that compare with it depending on the situation. The Clam artifact set is the standard choice, as it allows him to reach anywhere from 100,000 to 130,000 damage per rotation with an HP build, depending on how many times you use his skill. The instructor set is another option, but while its supportive buffs are quite good, they come at the cost of replacing several 5-star artifacts with 4-star ones, making it much harder for you to reach the maximum HP thresholds for Baiju's buffs, or even maintain proper energy recharge levels. Still, it can compare to the Clam set if there are multiple offensive units on the team that benefit from the Elemental Mastery buff, and if Baizhu is allowed to take the field multiple times a rotation to reapply it. The Tenacity of Millilith set and other HP choices are not as good in general, because even in this scenario you need the extra HP to reach 50,000 HP. That 20 or 40% extra HP just can't match the output of the Clam artifact set on a team-wide scale. For example, other choices include something like Noblesse, but Dendro teams don't exactly benefit that much from attack percent in general, so it's more of a niche option. What everybody wants to know about Baizhu is whether or not he's a buff for any pre-existent character. By nature, so as a defensive-minded character, Baizhu naturally has some noticeable limitation from the offensive side, as his contribution in that sense is just lackluster if you compare him to traditional offensive 5-star character. In fact, the outlook of his kit is more like a Dendro-focused Zhongli, and since the latter is often a damage loss compared to more offensive options, such as Bennett, it wouldn't be weird for Baizhu to suffer the same fate. A big difference, however, is that Dendro teams are a bit more limited in structure than most other teams, as characters like Bennett just don't bring many benefits to these teams, so the role's consolidation of offense and defense Baizhu provides becomes harder to replace. In fact, compared to somebody like Yao Yao, though somebody that technically covers the same roles, Baizhu stacks up pretty well. His healing is more reliable, his buffing capabilities are more versatile, and he can offer higher raw damage contribution in general thanks to the Clam artifact set, and the Catalyst's supportive options he has access to. On the other hand, Yao Yao can compare to him in terms of buffing capabilities on teams that feature an on-fielder that deals Dendro damage, like Haitham, and she's probably a more reliable holder of the Deepwood artifact set, since her elemental skill attacks are more likely to target multiple opponents throughout a rotation. On this sense, this is also pretty important in terms of elemental application. In fact, while Baizhu is generally superior to Yao Yao in single target scenarios in that regard, things become more complex when you start considering AoE scenarios, on teams where both can have some field time, so a scenario that allows Yao Yao to use her burst and Baizhu to use some normal attacks. This can mainly happen on Nilou Bloom quickswap teams, so teams that can fully take advantage of Yao Yao's AoE application. These scenarios are harder to evaluate, but it's worth noting that Baizhu does have access to some AoE application through his elemental skill, which can hit up to 3 different targets per cast. In general, I would say Baizhu will definitely have the advantage in single target situations, and possibly in low AoE situations, with Yao Yao only being potentially better in this scenario I just mentioned. Moreover, just like Nahida, he can easily cover driving roles for Hyperbloom or Burgeon teams thanks to his Dendro-infused auto-attacks, while also being basically immortal himself, which makes him a very safe alternative for those teams. His application is not as good as Nahida's, especially in AoE situations, but this might not be as important as some think, since Nahida Hyperbloom teams often end up generating more than 2 seeds per electro attack, which means Hyperblooms on those teams get wasted due to her internal cooldowns, so Baizhu might prove to be a quite reliable offensive alternative. Regarding specific team roles, it's something I covered extensively in my past videos, which I really suggest you to watch if you want to know about Baiju's fate on these teams in detail. To summarize, he's tied to Nahida on teams that feature on-fielders that just benefit too much from her, like Haitham and Cyno Quickbloom teams. Meanwhile, he can stack up to her quite nicely on teams where her buffing capabilities are not as important, like electro-focused Quicken teams, since if you use a defensive option like Zhongli on those teams, you can just replace Nahida with Baizhu and Zhongli with Kazuha, as these are swaps that signify a damage increase in my calculations. So, for all Haitham teams, Baizhu would only have a role in triple Dendro Quicken teams. In this slot, he can be a slight damage increase if compared to Yao Yao for the team, and pretty much a Zhongli side grade all things considered. Regarding Cyno, he's an interesting choice for double Dendro Quick Bloom teams, an option that should maximize bloom consistency and quicken uptime on the lineup, while also providing sign of some much needed healing. Baizhu is a superior choice in this slot compared to somebody like Yao Yao, since he can just deal more damage and his buffs are pretty meaningful for Cyno. In my Cyno video, I concluded that the team can be superior compared to Chaos and double Electro Cyno lineups in single target situations, while AoE situations are more complex, since Thoma and Cookie variants of the comp provide more consistency in terms of triggering blooms that are far away from Cyno. Of course, solo Electro situations for Cyno imply you have to use the Thundering Fury set on him, around 135 energy recharge, and a Favonius weapon on the team. On Quicken, just like I said earlier, the Baizhu Kazuha combination should be a very favorable option in terms of offense produced and survivability for other Electro-based Quicken teams, so the ones that feature Yae and Keqing, the argument for Baizhu and Kazuha becomes even stronger, as Kazuha's impact is just massive if you have multiple elemental units that can benefit from his buff on the team. So this combination is much stronger than the Nahida Zhongli variant. On these teams, you want Baizhu to use the Hakushin ring instead of the prototype Amber, and Instructor can also be argued over Clam. For Nilou Bloom teams, things are more vague, as these teams are not quantifiable through damage calculations due to how Bloom's value can go up exponentially depending on the targets at reach. In particular for Baizhu, he should be able to replace Nahida nicely on 1 Dendro 3 Hydro setups, because these setups are normally risky to play with an on-field Nahida, as in some situations you might have to swap out from her to avoid dying. And since the Dendro application on the team completely nullifies if she goes off-field, that can be a huge issue. Baizhu should be more reliable in that role thanks to his healing capabilities, which will generally guarantee he can stay on field as much as you want. On double Dendro lineups that use Kokomi as a driver, he's generally going to be a side grade compared to Yao Yao. For his Constellations, you should only care about the utility side of things, since any damage increase is pretty worthless for him, even if you assume he has a full damage oriented build. In this sense, Constellation 1 is nice, since it alleviates his energy requirements. Constellation 2 adds extra healing and Dendro application on a 5 seconds cooldown, and Constellation 4 is a nice elemental mastery buff for the whole team, which makes his supportive effects better on basically every comp he fits in. Overall, Baizhu is honestly a pretty decent unit. His healing capabilities are very good, and his offensive contribution can be nice on teams where all of his abilities are valuable. I think the closest he gets to a great pull is on Cyno teams, as those kinds of teams can really make use of the increased survivability Baizhu provides, among other things. On anything else, it's just a pull if you like situation to me, as he can situationally be a nice option for some compositions, but nothing revolutionary. I'm done for today. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe. See you next time!